Curio, and today I will be discussing the serial killer Dennis Rader, also known as his alias BTK. I will be doing a deep dive into BTK's childhood, motives, fixations, his victim list, and his MO. So let's get into this by an intro by Alex Alvarellos.
BTK. You know the nickname and you know what he did. He bound his victims, tortured them relentlessly, and soon killed them. He left that for people to find, with almost a dozen confirmed kills.
As the intro mentioned, BTK got his name from binding, torturing, and killing his victims. But he wasn't always this cold-hearted killer. Dennis Rader, born in Pittsburgh, Kansas, March 9th, 1945, to William and Dorothea Rader, spent the first years of his life in Columbus, and actually when Dorothea was pregnant with him, she had a terrible fall from a horse, and Dennis would wonder for years if that fall was responsible for his murderous tendencies, which he nicknamed Factor X. Another cause that could have been contributed to Dennis's dark tendencies could have been when he was 6 months old and his mother Dorothea dropped him on his right side of his head so badly he turned blue, and he never even saw a doctor. Dennis thought these head injuries could have scrambled the wires in his head, messed up his programming, as he said. The seeds of Dennis's murderous fantasies were planted at a very young age. At around 3 to 4 years old, Dennis became terrified of monsters and would see them around his house and everywhere he went. As he grew up, he thought the fear of monsters was connected to his want to kill, but it was most likely a coping tactic. But he was also oddly aroused by the fear the monsters would give him, saying for some strange reason, I would feel tightness in my crotch. This could have been the very first sighting of Dennis's paraphilia. Paraphilia can involve an intense attraction to abnormal scenarios and fantasies. Dennis would love imagining himself as prey being hunted by monsters, with him unable to do anything about it. Later in 1949, Dennis's family and him moved to Wichita, Kansas, and lived in a 2-bed-and-bath house with a yard and chicken coop that fascinated young Dennis. He loved watching his parents tie up the chickens for the slaughter, and loved watching the chickens struggle moments before they were beheaded. These were the first signs of sexual arousal due to murder. Growing up, Dennis was very close with his mother. They had a love-hate relationship because she would often punish him by beating him with a belt, but she could be loving and caring towards him whenever he was sick or stressed. In elementary school, Dennis wasn't doing well academically or socially, and often spent time with his mother watching horror movies, which they both loved. Later on, when Dennis was 12, there was an incident that happened when him and his friends were trespassing on some land. So the teens who lived there tied up Dennis and his friends and threatened them, which Dennis seemed to very much enjoy. Dennis knew he couldn't tell anyone about his desires or fantasies, so he kept them well hidden, and even tried to get away from them by attending church services frequently. Dennis tried his hardest to be good. He wouldn't curse, drink, or smoke like other kids his age, but that peaceful state didn't last long. He would later in his teenage years kill animals and watch the light in the eyes go out, foreshadowing what he was going to do in the future. Over the course of 1959, Dennis became obsessed with serial killers. The 14-year-old Dennis Rader found a magazine about a serial killer who had bound his victims and killed them. Dennis's eyes were glued to that magazine for a decent amount of time, and he wanted to be exactly like the serial killer he was reading about. After high school, Dennis had a part-time job and enrolled in college, but still tried to make time for his dark desires by putting together a hit kit, a kit he would use whenever he wanted to kill somebody. College was difficult for Dennis, and at the time in the mid-60s, the Army was drafting college students with poor grades to fight in Vietnam. Dennis knew his bad grades would put him at risk for being drafted and to fight at the front lines, so he decided to avoid the fighting by enlisting in the Air Force in 1966. During this time, Dennis would cut girls out of magazines and draw ropes on them to fuel his bondage fantasies. Dennis's first sexual encounter was with a prostitute in 1967, while he was in Japan overseas on his deployment. Dennis has stated that being in the Air Force had repressed his force to kill since he was always busy doing something. There was just no time to think about darkness or killing. In 1969, Dennis found out about the Manson murders and actually pitied the victims, especially pregnant actress Sharon Tate. This empathy suppressed his darkness for a short time. After finishing his military service in 1970, Dennis returned back to his hometown, Wichita, Kansas, and had been attending church again, where his mother had set him up with a fellow church girl. Paula Dietz was the name. Dennis had said that he was so in love with Paula, he had lost his need to kill almost completely. They dated for a few months, then got married in 1971. Sadly, Dennis's urges came back to him, and he began cutting out women from magazines again, making his own homemade bondage pictures, and falling back into old habits. In 1971, he put together another hit kit and would carry it in his car, not sure who he was going to kill, but he would be up to it whenever the opportunity fell into his lap. Later, when Dennis lost his job at a Coleman's factory, he no longer had anything keeping him away from his dark fantasies. Often feeling mad and depressed, sometime in 1973, Dennis tried to kidnap the bank teller, which didn't go as expected, and he had to run away before anyone saw him. This only made Dennis want to search harder for potential victims. One morning, while driving his wife to work, Dennis spotted a Latin woman and her daughter, and decided these two would be his next project, as he would call it. Dennis didn't have an age limit for his victims. He just wanted to kill whoever he could and still remain free. Dennis went on to stalk the woman and her daughter until he eventually made his way into the house in January 1974. The home included family members such as the mother and father, Julie and Joseph Otero, and their 5 children. When Dennis went to the Otero family house, he found Julie and Joseph Otero and their children, 9-year-old Josephine and 11-year-old Joey. There, luckily, the 3 other children had already left for school by the time Dennis got there at 8:20 a.m. Dennis had also cut the phone lines when he arrived so no one could call for help. Dennis made his way to the back door when he spotted footprints in the snow. It turns out the Otero family had a dog. Dennis, unsure what to do about this, contemplated about returning home, and suddenly the back door had opened, and little Joey had been standing in the doorway, looking confused towards Raider. Soon the Otero family dog started barking at Dennis, so he needed to take action. He put the gun towards Joey's head and barged into their home. Julie and Josephine were both in the kitchen and started crying once they saw Dennis with Joey. Joseph Otero was in the bedroom and came running when he heard his family screaming. To lower tensions, Dennis lied and told a fake story about how he was a wanted man and he was only there for a getaway car. To make sure Joseph and Julie didn't fight back, Dennis acted in casual banter with them to make them drop the guard about what he was really there to do. Being the psychopath he was, his mask of sanity could fool anyone, even his own victims. Dennis then went to the bedroom and tied up the Otero family and began to gag them as well. Dennis decided to murder Joseph Otero first, since he was the most threatening. He strangled him and then strangled Julie Otero, then moved on to the children. Joey had started crying, so Dennis placed a bag on his head. Moments later, to surprise, Joseph and Julie Otero woke up. Turns out he only choked them unconscious, and they awoke in terror once they realized what was happening to their children, which Dennis got a thrill from. Raider went on to torture and kill the family, then went on to kill his other 6 victims over the course of 17 years. Mostly targeting women for sexual gratification, his spree lasting from 1974 to 1991. During this time, Raider would leave taunting letters to police and news stations about his killings, and coined his own nickname as BTK. One instance where he wrote to a local TV station about lack of media coverage, he stated, "How many people do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or national attention?" From these actions alone, people have said Dennis could have been a psychopath as well as antisocial and a narcissistic personality disorder. Dennis' public perception, known as BTK, sparked fear in the homes of people living in Wichita, Kansas, and had the police hunting him down around the clock. But as soon as the murders started, they soon stopped, and BTK had become a cold case in the 1980s. Since no new kills or tips were coming in, then in 2004, Wichita, Kansas, did a 30-year anniversary of the BTK killings, stating BTK had either died or had been incarcerated. Once Dennis learned about this news, he sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle, taking responsibility for a killing that transpired in 1986, reopening the investigation. Soon after, in 2005, they eventually traced everything back to Dennis Rader, who had been a trusted church official and a Boy Scout leader, who had been caught due to his own ego and finally announced to the public as BTK. After being arrested and tried, Dennis showed no remorse towards the victims and was sentenced to 175 years in prison without the possibility of parole, this being the best sentence they could give him, since at the time of his killings, the death penalty had not been enrolled into Kansas. The impact of the BTK case showed that evil does not have a face, and an ordinary person you see day to day could actually be a monster deep down inside, and you would never even know until they were caught.